Thank you very much for being so brave and staying here for the two last lectures. I will try to very shortly really survey what we do at the CAAI. We talked about the future, about what we do in everyday life. And with our team in CAAI today, I think we deal between 20-30% of our days with those advanced enterprises. You've seen the national drone initiatives, and we have what we do from day to day. And just to give you a quick survey of where we stand today. So we are closing in on almost 200 air operators doing UAS in Israel. We have many remote pilots, as you've seen today, from government ministries. Over 1,000 remote pilots. Most of them are for multi-rotor drones. I've checked before this talk, and we have more than 2,000 registered UASs in our registration today. And we have a lot of different projects, some of which you could have seen here in the exhibition today, many of them not. And many activities, both private R&D and very big companies that you know, starting with IAI, with this big plane you've seen outside, and with the smallest AUS, that a new technology had to be developed for it. And we've spoke since this morning, and I'm summing up different things I've heard throughout the day. So the CAA is a member of ICAO, the international flight under the UN. It's over 190 countries all working within the same treaty, the Chicago Treaty 1994, was it? And this treaty has annexes. The annexes have to do with all different aspects of flight in Israel, like in all other, and like the other countries have to follow, though. They have to do with many different things, with their private license, with the airworthiness of the aircraft. And what ICAO have done lately is updating all those annexes of the flight and added to them special aspects that have to do with UASs. And ICAO has to do with international aspects, but they also encourage the different countries in the world to also apply the same principles to domestically. And this is actually what we do. We sit within our compartments, and we each in our compartment, we try to analyze these updates and see how it affects Israel, and see the different rules and regulations need to be updated according to those updates of ICAO. And the last update, very interesting when it comes to airworthiness, if you would like to see it, under Annex 8. It is a very, very big and thorough update that will be valid by 2026. It will be enforced by then. And it has many aspects of flight, of AOSs, that until today were not registered. And now it is all very detailed about requirements if you want to develop AOSs for the future, especially for people who would like to also fly between countries internationally. It doesn't sound far-fetched at all. A bit of a reminder, because things were very, high level, high altitudes. But this is what I call the onion layers of the onion model. What we need to remember is that when you touch to flights, you also talk about AUSs, whether we're talking about manned, unmanned. There are some critical points without which the flight will not happen. So we have the registered aircrafts. Each aircraft, whether it's a drone or a plane, must be registered. A flight model, that when you develop it, when you do something commercial with it, it has to be a registered aircraft like any other plane, 4X, ABC, and then 3 letters, ABC. All these activities are done in our offices, CAA. An aircraft like a car has a license that's called a certificate of airworthiness. These could be either standard or like for big airplanes like Boeing, for example, and they could be special certificates like AOS, for example. All of them have special certificates mostly experimental. Most of them are for development, for experimental flights. Different AOS companies that ask us to do commercial activity, we give them special certificate that's a bit different. And what's important for you to know is there are Israeli regulations allow us to do commercial activity with the AUS absolutely routinely, and you can work and profit and do it legally, and it's very clear cut. Apart from that, we have the pilot, the remote pilot basically, that also is authorized parallel to license of pilot license. It's adjusted for AOS and according to the certain platform that that person uses. We've talked about commercial companies. We have the airspace, the national airspace. What happens to it? We spoke about it today. We take the national airspace of Israel, and through this enterprise of the National Drone Initiative, we are building the next story, or maybe we're actually adding bases, and we're expanding full new areas in Israel that didn't have flight in them, and now we are creating a regulated airspace. And of course, we have the traditional airspace in every possible altitude, and it's all documented under PAMAT documentation. Did I press the button? Why is it not? Can you please help me here? All right, there we go. Where do we go forward? So unfortunately, because of the governance stagnation that lasted during the past 2-3 years, we weren't able to move forward with regulation we have planned. I think we've presented on the last UVID the same process, and Israel is going to apply first a new regulation for AUSs of up to 25 kilograms, a format that's very close to the 14 SFR 107 from the US, and do many different actions that are more simple. And we talk about registration, and the registration is becoming more simple, much cheaper and focused. And online registration and the licensing is also changing. It will be partly online and partly have to be tested, but much more simply. And under 25 kilograms aircrafts that are with visual sight, with line of sight, will not have a need for a special certificate as long as they are activated in open spaces that are away and keep visual sight. They will be able to develop without the more intimate interface that we have today in the present processes.
We will develop an unmanned platform with advanced capabilities going beyond line of sight, advanced scenarios inside our organization that will enable efficiency and swiftness to really enable great service for the developer of this platform and move forward with its advanced capabilities and operate their platform. And as I said, it's based on the fact that they want to do something that is new and advanced and different, and we're looking at this advancement parameter. Different slide. Beyond this, we are working on new regulations that what we call aerial drone rules, monitoring, photography, everything that is commercial work in regular permanent parameters. And these processes are moving forward, as Benny said before. If we want these processes to go faster and be agile, and this was presented a lot today, Today, the procedures do not support this. They are long procedures, drawn out. We are now checking this. We are joining with the public and bringing the public into the process of regulation. And at the end, we also get to the Knesset. Benny, how long did you say? 3, 4, 5 years, assuming that the government functions. Only then we are able to do the correction that we wanted to do 5 years ago. So there's work to do in an advanced world, to do quick, swift changes that the industry and the public needs, and the level of the government to see how this all becomes more simple. There are more details here. I'm not going to get into details, but this is what I described before. We're deregulating platforms until 25 kilograms in line of sight, creating a more simplified regulatory environment and focusing on the heavy equipment, those that have advanced scenarios beyond line of sight, urban operations, special operations, and those that have a higher risk. A field that we wanted to focus on is a format in which we focus when we want to have advanced operations. The method that developed in the world was developed by JAROS. It's an assortment of 60 countries that the aerial administrators joined together to have a new regulatory platform. They're active more than 10 years. They developed a method to have risk assessment for drone operations, for R&D and experimentation, but also for regular commercial activities. Risk assessment, it's a method, a structured method, relatively simple to understand. It has 10 standard stages, and this is the method that we today in Israel implement, also with a national drone initiative that analyzes all the scenarios that you saw today in this, using this method, and this enables us to have a standard risk assessment to understand what risk it creates for the public, how to manage, how to monitor the risk, what specific kinds of assessment and tests need to be done for a specific platform in order to prove it. It's significantly different from the classic track of aviation. If you know, the regular certification for aerial platforms goes from a very tiresome process going through a very thick book of requirements, and there's not necessarily a priority for this or that component. You have to follow every single rule from the first page to the last. Here we analyze specific scenarios, specific platforms, specific missions. We understand what the risks are for the ground, for instance, for crashing, for people on the ground. The risks of crashing into another aerial platform with people in it. And when we analyze this using this methodology, we are able to monitor and manage what we call the mitigation, how we mitigate the risks and minimize the risk. Through this, we in CAAI are able to authorize such activity. Some things that interest us in CAAI, as far as the SORA, the Specific Operation Risk Assessment. First, we published a document dealing with the BVLOS, Beyond Visual Line of Sight, a simple document that puts on the table the various components that developers need to address when they develop it. This document is on our website, and we send the companies to this website before developing. The other thing is ERP, Emergency Response Plan. This is a key component of risk management. It relates mainly to companies and operators that want to work in urban areas, flying over cities or neighborhoods. And it's important there to understand the worst case. Okay, something happened. The system failed, it crashed, it already happened. What do we do now? This is from this simple response that is simply to call the police and update them, to more complex systems and processes of pre-planned coordination with the city, the police, other rescue teams, to drills and training for such systems. Looking forward, for instance, companies that will have commercial, massive activity inside of cities, and you heard that this is planned, tens and hundreds of flights over Tel Aviv. Statistically, theoretically, things can happen. The idea here is to manage these risks and plan them in advance, and what the company will do when this happens, if and when this happens. One of the applications that are very popular are integrating parachutes in the air platforms for contingency, and also here in the world, we follow what happens in the world, and there is a great debate about what is the reasonable energy or impact energy that this parachute reduces the impact energy. Today the number is 69 joules, even though if you look in the American regulation that they recently did, they're hitting the ground are lower numbers. I imagine that in the upcoming years we will improve these numbers and we will have more constraints on this parameter. Very important for commercial operation to look at the systems as standard. Today in the initiative there are various platforms, mainly platforms that are off-the-shelf platforms that have been transformed from imagery to other missions like deliveries. We see this happening in the world. Companies develop aerial platforms that have a basic ability as far as the manufacturer, and there is a basic understanding of the configuration of the aircraft. Last thing, we are now working on a document talking about the specific SORA implication for Israel. This will be published in 2022, in the beginning of the year. A document that will tell companies that want to develop such platforms about the specific characteristics that CAAI wishes them to implement. Where are we going? Future challenges. We are looking at the heavy platforms, the commercial ones. The Ministry of Finance or Economy just talked about this. Companies that want to manufacture frameworks, heavy drones in Israel, manned, unmanned platforms or with passengers. These will have higher standards. They need a lot of more regulation that today we do not see in drones, we don't deal with. Highly automated systems, this was also mentioned today. At the highest level of autonomy, what we call level 5, no person in the loop at all. We have to understand the significance of such a platform as far as responsibility and accountability for incidents that may develop in aviation in general, not only drones. Also, civil aviation today, airliners that will become autonomous. We are dealing, of course, through this initiative with defining Israel's U-space through the initiative, the INDI, but our CAAI must ultimately define regulations. We have to define how we will standardize implementations in BVLOS, and also talk about AAM air taxis that in phase 1 will be small drones that there's a pilot in them, and later on will be unmanned platforms but that carry passengers. This is coming soon. CAAI is dealing with it now, first through ground infrastructure, talking about the air pads, because without the air pads we won't have planes. That's it. Thank you very much.